Hello there, neighbors. Just a quick mention before we jump into the episode. I've been posting a lot more short-form content on TikTok and Instagram. So if you would be so kind, stop on over to either of those platforms and check it out. It's in the same vein as the things that I talk about on the podcast. Once in a while, there's some content there that's a little bit more lighthearted and comedic than the podcast itself, but I think you'll enjoy it. And if you do, please like, follow, and comment if you would. Alrighty then, let's move on to the episode. There is a decent chance that you've driven past one of these things and never noticed it. A small black box on a pole, maybe near an intersection, maybe at the edge of town, maybe by a school or a shopping center or the entrance to a neighborhood. It doesn't look dramatic. It doesn't look futuristic. It doesn't look like the opening scene of some dystopian thriller where the music gets all thumpy and the guy in the black turtleneck whispers, "We are watching." It looks like municipal clutter. A sign, a camera, a solar panel, a box on a stick. And that's actually part of the problem. Because that little camera may not be there to catch speeders. It may not be there to issue tickets. It may not even be there to record normal video in the way most of us think about security cameras. It may be an automated license plate reader. It may be scanning cars as they pass, reading plates, logging the time, logging location, capturing details about the vehicle, and entering that information into a searchable database. Now, one camera is a tool. One camera looking for a stolen car or a vehicle connected to a serious crime or a missing person. Most people can understand that. I can understand that. Crime matters, victims matter. If someone steals a car or kidnaps a child or commits a violent crime and police have a tool that helps find the vehicle, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that it's some abstract concern floating, in a law school seminar. But thousands of cameras connected through a searchable system, well, that becomes something else entirely. Because the question is not whether police should be able to find a stolen car. Of course they should. The question is whether solving stolen car cases requires building a searchable map of everybody's movements. Because your license plate seen one time is a moment. Your license plate stored over time is a pattern. And a pattern can reveal a life. Where you work, where you worship, where you get medical care, where you protest, where you organize, where you spend the night, where you go when nobody thinks they have any right to ask. So, in this episode, I want to talk about flock cameras. And we're talking about the quiet little camera on the pole that raises one very big question. When does a crime-fighting tool become a tracking system for ordinary people? Hello, neighbors. You're listening to a Friday edition of Back Porch Files from your neighbor on the left. A podcast about progressive politics, human decency, the life on the blue side of America's ideological divide. My name is Don Spielis, and I am your host. And today, we're talking about flock cameras. Flock cameras are part of a growing network of automated license plate readers, often called ALPRs. They're being sold to police departments, towns, neighborhoods, business districts, and other local institutions as public safety tools. And to be clear, this is not an episode about how police should ever have tools. That is not the argument. That is never my argument. The argument is that useful tools still need to have rules. Because when a private company builds the platform, local government buys the cameras, Police departments search the data, agencies share access, and ordinary people find out after the fact that we're no longer just talking about a camera. We're talking about surveillance infrastructure. And that's not an exaggeration. That's not a phrase that I use lightly. That is what it is. And surveillance infrastructure should never arrive disguised as a quiet line item at a sleepy public meeting. So let's begin with the basics. Flock cameras are automated license plate readers. That means that they are designed to capture images of passing vehicles, read the license plates, record the time and the location, and often capture other identifying details about the vehicle, like the make, model, color, sometimes other visible characteristics. Now, that sounds simple enough. A car drives past, the camera reads the plate, the system stores the sighting. If that plate is connected to a stolen vehicle, a missing person alert, or a law enforcement watch list, it can send an alert. That's the clean version. That's the brochure version. That's the version that sounds like the camera is wearing a little crossing guard vest and just trying to help everyone. But the important part is not only the camera. The important part is the system behind the camera. Because this is not just a person standing on a sidewalk noticing that your car drove by. It's not just a patrol officer seeing your license plate in traffic. It's not the same as someone glancing at a car in public and then going on with their day. A human being sees and forgets. A database sees and remembers. That's a big difference. And this is where a lot of the debate gets muddy on purpose, because people will say, well, your license plate is visible in public anyway. And yes, of course it is. Nobody is claiming your license plate is a diary locked in a safe under your bed. It's bolted to the outside of your car. The state literally requires you to display it. But privacy is not only about whether one piece of information can be seen. Privacy is also about aggregation and scale and memory and searchability and the sharing of the information. There's a big difference between your neighbor seeing you drive past the grocery store and a searchable system logging that your car passed a certain camera at 8:17 on Tuesday morning, and then another one at 8:42, and then another one at 5:13, and then keep those sightings in a system that someone else may be able to search later. That's the leap. Not from invisible to visible, but from visible to recorded, from recorded to searchable, from searchable to shareable, from shareable to normal. And once all of that becomes normal, then the burden shifts. Suddenly, the question isn't, why should the government be able to track this? At that point, the question becomes, why are you worried about being tracked? And that is backwards. In a free society, the government should have to justify surveillance. The public should not have to justify its discomfort with surveillance. Now, Flock says its license plate readers do not use facial recognition and are focused on vehicles, not people. And of course, that distinction matters. We should be accurate about that. This is not a face scanning system in the way people usually imagine facial recognition. I mean, let's not play dumb either. Cars are connected to people. Vehicles tell stories. Patterns tell stories. A license plate may not be a face, but it can still become a breadcrumb trail. And if a system can remember where a vehicle has been, then it can help reconstruct where a person has been. That's why this matters. Now, before we go any further, we have to be honest about why towns buy these cameras. Because if we pretend there's no legitimate public safety argument, then we lose the plot before we get to the first commercial break. Police departments do not usually walk into a city council meeting and say, "Good evening, everyone. We would like to build a searchable map of all your movements. Also, we brought donuts." What they actually say is, "We want to find stolen cars," or "We want to respond faster when there's an Amber Alert." They say, "We want to locate vehicles connected to robberies or shootings or burglaries or hit and runs or missing persons." And none of those are fake concerns. They are all real. If your car has ever been stolen, you probably do not respond to that by saying, well, let's be careful not to over-empower the database here. You want your car back, preferably before it has been converted into a mobile ashtray and abandoned behind a Dollar General. If a child is missing, nobody wants police standing around saying, we would love to help, but we're still workshopping our data retention framework. That is why this debate is tricky, because the sales pitch is not nonsense. It's very strong. These cameras can help police find vehicles. They can generate fast leads. They can alert officers when a plate connected to a stolen car or a serious case passes that camera. It's useful. And useful things are tempting because they arrive with results already in their hands. That is how a lot of surveillance expands, not because someone says, let's violate civil liberties for fun. It expands because someone points to a case where the tool helped. And then the argument becomes, well, if it helped there, why not use it here? And if it helped for stolen cars, why not use it for burglaries? If it helped for serious crimes, why not use it for investigations generally? And then, if our town has it, why not share it with the county? And if the county has it, why not share it with the state? And then suddenly, the helpful little tool has eaten 3 levels of government, and it's asking for dessert. That's the issue. The problem is not that police want tools. Police should have tools. The problem is that every tool creates a system, and every system needs rules before we discover what it can do in the wrong hands. Because public safety cannot be a magic phrase that turns off civil liberties. It can't be the universal skeleton key. It can't mean that every person who drives down a public road is automatically entered into a searchable database just in case that information becomes relevant or useful later. That's not targeted policing. That's collect first and justify later. And that is where the sales pitch starts to slide into something else, because the question is not, can this help solve a crime? The answer to that question may very well be yes. The better question is, what are we building around that ability? How much data is collected? How long is it kept? Who can search it? Who can share it? Who audits it? Who gets punished if it's misused? Who gets to say no, depending on the circumstances? Useful tools need rules. And when the tool is powerful enough to help reconstruct where people have been, the rules should not be optional decorations. They should be the price of admission. Now, here's where the privacy argument really begins. Not with the camera, with the pattern. Because one license plate sighting by itself may not tell you very much. A car passed a camera at a certain time. Fine, that's a dot. But dots become lines, and lines become maps, and maps become stories. If your car is recorded near your house every morning, near your job every weekday, near a certain medical building twice a month, near a particular church on Sunday, near a protest downtown, near someone else's house overnight, that is no longer just a list of harmless sightings. That's a rough draft of your life. And maybe none of that matters when decent people are using the system for narrow reasons under strict rules. But civil liberties are not built for the best case scenario. They are built because power changes hands, because policies drift, because departments get new leadership and vendors change terms, because emergencies get declared, because somebody decides that what was once only for serious crimes is now useful for other things. And because human beings, when given searchable tools, sometimes search things they shouldn't. That is why your plate is public argument wears thin real fast. It sounds reasonable until you apply it to anything else. Your face is visible in public too. That does not mean the government should be able to build a minute-by-minute searchable archive of everywhere your face appears. Your house is visible from the street. That doesn't mean that someone should be able to track every visitor and every delivery and every time your lights go on or off. The issue is not whether a piece of information can be seen. The issue is whether the government or private company working with the government gets to collect that information at scale, store it, search it, and share it. That is the civil liberties line there. And this is where ordinary people get swept in, because these systems are not only collecting information about stolen cars, they're not just collecting information about suspects or, after a crime has been committed. They collect first, and then the search happens later. That means most of the data is about people who did absolutely nothing wrong. People going to work or school, people going to the doctor, going to see their kids or buy groceries, or people going to a political meeting, people going to help a friend, people just living their lives. The suspect is the needle, but the haystack is us. And that part should bother us. Not because we're hiding some grand criminal secret, not because every trip to the pharmacy is a spy novel. It should bother us because freedom includes the ability to move through daily life without being casually cataloged by systems most people never approved, never understood, and can't meaningfully inspect. And I know what the answer will be from some people. Well, if you have nothing to hide, why do you care? Well, I care because privacy is not the same as guilt. I care because a free society doesn't require innocence as the entry fee for basic limits on government power. I care because the same people who say nothing to hide will absolutely lose their minds if the government wants to track their guns or their church attendance or their political donations or their browser history. And they should lose their minds about some of that. That's the point. Civil liberties are not only important when they protect people we already agree with. They're important because power is always more trustworthy before it has your data than after. Now, let's talk about the part that turns this from a local camera issue into something much larger, the network. Because if this were only one town putting one camera near one intersection with strict limits and short retention, no outside sharing, strong audits, public approval, and real consequences for misuse, we would still have a debate. But it would be a much smaller debate. The real power of systems like Flock is it's not just the camera on the pole, it's the platform behind it. A camera captures a plate goes into a system. Then the system can be searched and alerts can be created. Data can potentially be shared. Other agencies may have access depending on settings and agreements and policies and so on. So your town is not just buying a camera. Your town may be joining a network. And that changes the conversation entirely. Because now the question is not only what is our police department doing with this camera? Now the question is who else can touch that data? Can another town search it? Can the county search it? Can an out-of-state agency request access? Can one department search on behalf of another? Can a federal agency get information indirectly? Can the access rules be changed at any point? Can data gathered for one reason become useful for another? And who exactly is watching the watchers? That phrase gets used so often it started to sound like a bumper sticker, but it matters here because if a camera system is sold locally and networked nationally, then local consent may not mean what people think it means. A town council may believe it is approving a tool for local stolen car alerts. Residents may be told it's about a few cameras at busy intersections. Police may say it's for serious crimes. But if the platform makes sharing really easy, if access can expand, if settings can be changed, if outside agencies can enter the picture, then a local public safety purchase can become a small tile in a much larger mosaic. And nobody should have to be a software engineer with the municipal budget hobby to understand that before the cameras even go up. The town buys a camera, the department joins a network, and suddenly a local public safety tool starts looking like a national tracking grid with a customer service number. That does not mean every officer is abusing it. It doesn't mean every department has bad intentions or that there is one giant secret room where a guy named Chad is watching your Kia Sportage like, it owes him money. It means the structure matters. Systems do not need evil geniuses to become dangerous. Sometimes all they need is a weak policy or broad access or poor oversight and time. That's how mission creep works. The first justification is narrow. The second is practical. The third is convenient. The fourth is routine. And by the fifth, the thing everyone promised would never happen is now described as standard operating procedure. The network matters because one camera may help solve a crime, but a network of cameras can reconstruct movement. And if we're going to build anything that can reconstruct movement, then the public deserves more than just reassurances. The public deserves control. Now, one of the biggest concerns people have seen online is the question of federal access, especially immigration enforcement. And this is where I want to be careful because I'm not trying to be soft here. I just want to be accurate. Flock has publicly said it does not work with ICE. It has said federal sharing is limited or disabled by default. It has said its system is not supposed to be a direct pipeline to immigration enforcement. And of course that matters. We should not claim more than we can prove, but that also does not end the conversation. Because the concern is not only direct access, the concern is workaround access. The concern is agency to agency sharing or local departments searching on behalf of another agency. The concern is out-of-state access, informal cooperation, settings that can change, policies that can drift, contracts that can be updated, future officials who may look at a system built for one purpose and decide it would be great for another. And that is not paranoia. That is how government power often expands. A tool gets introduced for something most people support, stolen cars and missing kids. Nobody wants to be the person saying, actually, let's not help find the missing child. That's a ridiculous and impossible political position, and everyone knows it. Then, once the tool exists, the question becomes, well, what else can it do? And once people realize what else it can do, the next question then becomes, well, why not? Why not use it for immigration enforcement? Why not use it for protests? Why not use it for abortion investigations in states where that becomes the target? Why not use it for political demonstrations, debt collection, probation checks, school truancy, or whatever shiny new justification someone develops after a budget meeting and too much coffee? That is why the rules have to exist before the abuse, because after the abuse, everyone acts shocked. And I'm tired of government officials discovering civil liberties only after the machinery is already running. Civil liberties are not protected by vibes. They are not protected by a company FAQ. They're not protected by police or a police chief saying, you trust us. They're protected by enforceable rules, audit logs, public reporting, independent oversight, real penalties, clear limits on who can search and what they can search for and what happens when they cross a line. Because the issue is not only what the policy says today. The issue is what the system makes possible tomorrow. And if a system can track where cars have been and if cars are connected to people, if that information can be searched and shared and requested or routed through another agency, then we should not be comforted by the word default. Default settings aren't democracy. They're just a software with manners. Now, here's the part that should make people locally annoying. And I mean that as a compliment. A lot of communities do not have a big, loud, informed public debate before these cameras show up. Sometimes they do, and that's good. That's how it should work. But too often people find out after the fact. They see the camera first and then they ask what it is. And then someone says, well, that's for public safety. And then if they keep asking questions, eventually they may find out that there was a contract or a grant or a pilot program or a police budget request, whatever. And that's not good enough. The system that records public movement should not arrive like a pothole repair schedule. It should not be a quiet line item. It should not be something people discover only because a weird little pole appears at the edge of town and someone on Facebook says, does anybody know what that thing is? Which is apparently how half of modern civic education happens these days. One blurry photo and 319 comments, 6 of which are from a guy who thinks every antenna is communism. But under the noise is a serious question. Who approved this? Was there a public meeting? Were residents told what data would be collected? Were they told how long it would be kept or who could search it or whether other agencies could access it? Were they told whether federal agencies could get information directly or indirectly? Were they told what happens if an officer misuses the system? Or whether there is a sunset clause or whether this just renews itself over and over forever like a gym membership? Because local democracy is not supposed to be a scavenger hunt. You should not need a public records request and the stamina level of a medieval monk to figure out whether your town is building a vehicle tracking system. And this matters even if the answer is yes, we still want the cameras. That's fine. Then vote on it, debate it, write strict rules, publish the policy, require audits, show the public the retention period, show the public the sharing rules, make officials defend it in the daylight. If the tool is legitimate, it should survive being explained. The public does not need to win every argument, but the public deserves to know the argument is happening. That's the minimum. Once surveillance is built, it becomes very hard to remove. Budgets adapt around it, departments rely on it, vendors become embedded, officials point to all the success stories, and anyone who questions it later gets accused of wanting criminals to have, preferred treatment. That is how accountability gets strangled, not all at once, just one reasonable purchase at a time. Now, there's another piece of this that deserves more attention. This is not just the government putting up these cameras. This is government power routed through private technology infrastructure. And that changes the accountability problem. When government watches you directly, at least you know which building to protest in front of. You know where City Hall is. You know where the police department is. You know where the county commissioners meet. You can show up and sign in and wait 3 hours behind a zoning dispute and then get to say your piece into a microphone. But when surveillance runs through a private vendor, democracy suddenly has to read the terms of service. Now we're talking about contracts and platform rules and data retention settings and sharing defaults and dashboards and search tools and audit logs and cybersecurity and on and on and on and on. And the public is supposed to trust that all of that has been handled. By whom? The same local government that sometimes can't maintain a website with meeting minutes from last April. I mean, come on. Government power does not become harmless just because it comes with a user dashboard. If police use the system, if public agencies rely on the data, if the government can search where vehicles have been, then this is not a private product. It's a public power with a private interface. And that means the public deserves public rules, not just company promises and friendly marketing language, not just a statement that says the customer controls the data, because that immediately raises the next question. Which customer? The police department, the city, the homeowners association, the business district, the school district? And what about the people whose plates are actually being scanned? Where are they in the chain of control? Because this is one of the defining problems of modern government. Public power increasingly travels through private platforms. And when something goes wrong, everyone points sideways. The company says we only provide the tool, and the police say we follow the policy, and the city says, Well, we only approve the contract. And the vendor says the customer controls the settings. And the public says, I never even knew there was a database. And somehow everyone is responsible except the people who were watched. That's not accountability. It's a shell game. So no, the fact that this is a private company does not make it less concerning. In some ways, it makes it much more concerning. When surveillance is public enough to affect your freedom, but private enough to blur responsibility, you have built a little accountability maze. And ordinary people should not need a flashlight and a law degree to find the exit. Now, at this point, some people may say, so what is it you're saying? Ban every license plate reader everywhere? No, that is not the argument. The argument is that the default should not be a permanent shared searchable record of ordinary people's movements. A democratic society can say police may use powerful tools in limited ways for specific purposes under enforceable rules with oversight strong enough to matter. That's not radical. That's basic grown-up government. That is the civic equivalent of not handing a toddler a chainsaw because, he promises he only wants to trim one branch. So what would reasonable rules look like? Well, first of all, start with retention. If a vehicle is not connected to a crime, a missing person, a stolen car, or a specific investigation, then the data should not sit around for weeks or months or years just because storage is cheap and curiosity is expensive. Delete it quickly, very quickly. The innocent public should not become a warehouse of maybe useful later tidbits. Then there's access. Historical searches should require more than a hunch, more than convenience, more than I wonder where this person has been. There should be a warrant requirement, or at minimum, a strict approval process with written justification, supervisor review, and audit trails that cannot be quietly altered. Then there's sharing. No out-of-state sharing without explicit local approval. No open-ended access for agencies the public never talked about. No backdoor searches where one department does the looking on behalf of another. And absolutely no immigration enforcement workaround where everyone says, well, technically we did not give them access, while the data still ends up in the same place wearing the same fake mustache. Then there's transparency. The public should know where the cameras are, what they collect, how long the data is retained, who can search it, how often it's searched, how many alerts are generated, how many are false, how many outside requests are made, how many are denied, whether anyone has been disciplined for misuse. All of that should be public knowledge. And if officials say no, that's too much to ask, then the tool is too powerful for them to use. Period. And then there's audits. Not internal, we checked ourselves, and great news, we're adorable audits. Real audits, independent audits, regular audits. Audits that are published in plain language so people do not need a decoder ring and a law degree to understand them. And then there need to be consequences. If an officer misuses the system to track an ex-girlfriend or a neighbor or a political opponent or a journalist or a protester or anyone else without proper cause, that cannot be handled with a disappointed email and a training video. There needs to be real penalties. Then, of course, democratic approval. Before cameras grow up, there should be a public hearing. Before contracts renew, there should be another one. Before the system expands, the public should get a say. And there should be a sunset clause so that these programs do not become permanent simply because everyone forgot to think about them. And that includes private entities, too. If a homeowners association or business district, school or private property owner or whoever installs cameras and shares data with police, there still need to be public rules. You should not be able to outsource surveillance and then pretend it's none of the public's business. Because here is the simple standard. If the tool is as reasonable as they say it is, then it should survive rules, reasonable rules. If it can't survive short retention, clear limits, public reporting, audits, penalties, and democratic approval, then maybe the problem isn't the critics. Maybe the problem is the tool. And this is where we have to zoom out, because this episode isn't just about Flock. Flock is the doorway. The larger room is surveillance itself. How it arrives and how it grows and how it becomes normal before most people even realize it exists. Modern surveillance does not always show up with a dramatic announcement. It comes through convenience and safety language and grants and pilot programs and phrases like limited use and emergency exceptions. It comes through a contract most people never read, approved at a public meeting most people never attended, explained in a PowerPoint most people never saw. And by the time the public looks up, the cameras are already on the poles, the data is already flowing, the vendor is already embedded, the department is already using it, and anyone asking questions is treated like they're trying to, hand a ski mask to every thief in town. That's the trick. The tool may actually be very useful. That is what makes this harder. If it were useless, the argument would be easy. We could all point at the expensive spy box in the pole and say, well, that was dumb, and then go back to pretending local government is not mostly a fog machine attached to a copier lease. But useful tools are more dangerous when they are unaccountable, because their usefulness becomes their shield. They solved a case, they found a car, they helped an investigation, and all of those things matter. But in a free society, usefulness cannot be the only standard. If usefulness were the only standard, the government could justify almost anything. Track every phone, scan every face, read every email, store every movement, watch every protest. After all, it might help solve something someday. That's not freedom. That is a dragnet. Temporary tools become permanent systems. Local tools become network tools. Narrow tools become general purpose tools. Public safety becomes public tracking if nobody forces limits into the system. And the future does not always kick down the door. Sometimes it gets approved unanimously at a Tuesday night meeting while 3 people are in the audience and one of them is there about the pothole. That's why people need to ask questions now, not after the system is huge, not after the data has already been misused, not after the access has already expanded, or the next emergency gives everyone permission to forget certain rules. Now, everyone needs to be thinking about this now. Before the machine decides remembering everyone is just how roads work. So let's go back to that little camera on the pole. It may look ordinary. It may be ordinary in the sense that we're getting very good at making extraordinary surveillance look like street furniture. But the question behind it is anything but small. The question is not whether crime matters. Of course it does. The question is not whether victims deserve justice. They do. It's not whether police should have tools. Of course they should. The question is whether ordinary people should be quietly entered into a searchable movement database just because they drove somewhere. To work or school or church or the doctor or the protest or the union meeting or to the place that's nobody's business. We should not have to choose between solving crimes and living in a country where the government cannot casually reconstruct your movements. That is a false choice, a lazy choice, a choice usually offered by people who want the power of surveillance without the burden of accountability. Public safety and civil liberties are not enemies. The enemy is unaccountable power. So if a town wants these cameras, then make the case. In public, with details, with limits, with audits, with short retention, with real penalties, no backdoor sharing, no quiet expansion, no shrugging and saying, trust us, while the database hums along in the background. Because the camera may be small, the pole may be ordinary. The sales pitch may sound harmless, but a democracy should be very, very careful about building machines that remember where everyone has been. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to download and listen to this installment of Back Porch Files. I wonder if this topic is one that is as commonly known about or talked about as some of the others. I would love to hear from you on this. Go to the website, neighborontheleft.com, and shoot me a DM on the contacts page through one of the social media platforms, or email the podcast. Let me know what your thoughts are on this. While you're there, you can check out the episodes section of the website, download it, or stream any episode of the podcast. And I do encourage you to stop by the blog section. I post every time I do an episode of the podcast, and I list all of the sources that I'm using. Very important these days. It's Friday, so the weekend is here. I'll be back on Monday with another episode of Your Neighbor on the Left. So between now and then, stay engaged, stay kind, and have the kind of weekend you'd wish for others.